From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
President Biden finally addresses the protests on college campuses that have spread throughout the country and have sometimes resulted in mass arrests and clashes with police. Plus, the Federal Reserve stands pat on interest rates, but Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Fed, sounds like he's not too worried about the recent first quarter rebound in prices. What does this mean for the economy and interest rates going forward? Welcome. I'm Paul Gigot with Wall Street Journal Opinion Pages here in our Potomac Watch podcast, and I'm here with my colleagues Mary Anastasia O'Grady and Kim Strassel. Welcome to you both. So let's talk about the protests first. Really the biggest story across the country these days as the protests are continuing after the big arrests at Columbia and CUNY in New York. On Tuesday evening, on Wednesday, there were something like 90 arrests at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire. There were serious clashes at UCLA where police tried to take down an encampment. They got violent at some point. And President Biden finally emerging at the White House after a lot of calls that he say something, walked out Thursday, and here's an excerpt of what he had to say.
Violent protest is not protected. Peaceful protest is. It's against the law when violence occurs. Destroying property is not a peaceful protest. It's against the law. Vandalism, trespassing, breaking windows, shutting down campuses, forcing the cancellation of classes and graduations. None of this is a peaceful protest. Threatening people, intimidating people, instilling fear in people is not a peaceful protest. It's against the law.
Well, I thought that was a fairly definitive statement. Kim, what did you think?
Well, it was an obvious statement. I think the remarkable thing to me is why it took so long for the White House to have him come out and say it. This violence has been going on for a while now. It's been days since protesters started occupying campus buildings, breaking windows. I mean, obviously, these police clashes have been very difficult to watch in some places, and you realize how far out of hand some of these have got. So my first impression that it was a little bit too late. And also just the bare minimum, too. This might have been an opportunity for the president to come out and talk about what's really going on here, the goals. But he seems so interested instead in splitting things down the middle. He just does not want to upset his radical left, which is behind a lot of this. You know, you still have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez out there condemning the police for going in to break up these encampments. Bernie Sanders refusing to really condemn anti-Semitism and egging the protesters on. He, for some reason, cares very much about not alienating this small group of voters. But I would argue, Paul, that this is beginning to split his party down the middle. You have a lot of Democrats on the other side now that have sensed the danger here, and they are out trying to distance themselves from it. And the president made a start at that today. But, you know, even among those comments, he was still talking about the right to protest and the right for these people to be heard.
But wait a minute, Kim, don't they have the right to protest and right to be heard?
They do, except one of the things that has come out in all of this is how little universities have done to actually educate a lot of these kids. And yes, you can peacefully protest, but one of the discussions that we've been having for the past couple of weeks now is if you're simply standing there, you're not breaking any windows, you're not assaulting anyone, okay, that's great. But if you're chanting from the river to the sea, and you are making other students feel as though they cannot walk past you to get to a class, we need to be having a discussion about some of that.
Okay, so my own view would be you can say from the river to the sea. It's offensive because I think I know the meaning of it, which is we're having Jews into the Mediterranean.
Yeah, I think you can say it too.
Okay, but if you start harassing Jewish students or any students as they cross the green, that's when it becomes untenable, or if you occupy private spaces. Mary, I just want to take up the comments by the president and why he made them. I think he had to, and I say that because it's his policy that these protests are attacking, right? It's genocide. Joe has got to go. That's one of their frequent comments. And as Kim said, they're dividing his coalition. And on the one hand, there's some of his voters here, but also not a lot of public sympathy for breaking the law, not public sympathy for trespassing or occupying buildings.
Yeah, I think Kim's exactly right in that he was looking for a way to go right down the middle. He cares a lot about Michigan, and particularly he's worried about Dearborn, Michigan. So he wants to stress the law, but he also doesn't want to offend the protesters. And so that's why he's carefully choosing this language. I wish that he would have spoken more strongly about what is actually happening here, which is the denial of the rights of others. They're talking a lot about whether they have the right to do this, that, or the other thing. But in so much of what they've done, they've denied the rights of the others. They've been privatizing pieces of grass that are public spaces. That's also illegal. And I think the other reason he really needed to do this, and I think he needs to do more, is that this really is happening at the university level. But what's going on here is a larger problem of professional revolutionaries who want to basically disrupt the American system. And they think they want to see how much they can get away with. And they have some useful idiots on campuses that they can use to ignite this kind of clash between the police and the university. But once those things are sort of put down, it's not going to change the larger goals of these professionals who are going to continue to look for opportunities to be disruptive to society.
On that point, let's listen to Eric Adams, the New York mayor, who on Wednesday at a press conference explained what his police department discovered is going on in the protests on New York campuses and why he felt that the NYPD should intervene and shut down the encampments, take the students out of Hamilton Hall at Columbia. Let's listen.
There is a movement to radicalize young people, and I'm not going to wait until it's done and all of a sudden acknowledge the existence of it. This is a global problem that young people are being influenced by those who are professionals at radicalizing our children, and I'm not going to allow that to happen as the mayor of the city of New York.
Remarkable statement, Kim, from the mayor, a very forceful press conference that he gave, pointing to what he called outside agitators. That's his phrase. And of course, outside agitators was a phrase that was used against civil rights activists when they went into the South. They were called outside agitators. But Eric Adams, of course, who's a black mayor, he acknowledged on his own that that's a phrase that echoes of the civil rights movement, but he said it's very appropriate in this case, and I'm going to use it.
That's absolutely right. And good for him. This is an example of the Democrats, I'm saying, that have realized that public opinion is not where the White House had been up until today, and that they need to take action. And he was a very good point as well, because we're getting a lot of information that those who are being arrested are indeed people who are not students at these universities, rather have been trained in the art of professional agitation and uprising and violent protests, and that have been going in, urging on these kids, teaching them tactics of how to barricade themselves in. And as Eric Adams said, they're attempting to radicalize the youth on campus. And that is not something the university has invited anybody to come do. And they have no business being on those campuses engaged in that. So I was glad to see him call that out. Also, it was also great. He very proudly, his other fine moment was there had been a Palestinian flag raised. The police took it down, re-erected an American flag, and he said he found it despicable that anybody would raise a flag of another country here, especially as he had had relatives who had fought and died to defend this country. So it was, I think, a good moment for Eric Adams.
All right, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll have more on the fallout from these campus protests, which are continuing around the country and have significant political implications when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with the Wall Street Journal Opinion Pages, and I'm here with Mary O'Grady and Kim Strassel. We're talking about the campus protests and their political ramifications. The developments around the country are fascinating. I mean, you have violent clashes in some places, police removing at the request of universities in some other places. You have a couple of schools, Brown University, for example, Northwestern, where they negotiated with the students and made some concessions on divestment of the school endowment at Northwestern, not investing in Israel, which protesters have demanded in other schools. and those schools have refused to do that. But let's listen to the interim chancellor of the University of North Carolina as he intervened to take down a Palestinian flag that had replaced an American flag on campus.
This university doesn't belong to a small group of protesters. It belongs to every citizen of North Carolina. Everybody in North Carolina. Everybody who goes to school here, everybody who lives and works here. The flag represents all of us. To take down that flag and put up another flag, no matter what other flag it is, that's antithetical to who we are.
My first reaction to that, Mary, is they ought to take off the title interim and make him permanent chancellor.
Yep.
I wonder if there's even a higher job for him in this country. This kind of courage, and I think it takes some courage to do that. Some of these students are very violent, and we know what happens in cancel culture to people who stick their necks out. So that took a lot of courage, but I think it's exactly the right message that has been missing from our president, from a lot of our politicians, that somehow when the grievance crowd goes out to complain, that all of a sudden their grievances have to be acknowledged and validated, and everybody else has to move out of the way. And the more you do that, the more they come after you. So at some point, somebody has to draw a line, and it's great to see leadership at this university doing that.
And the forcefulness of the statement, Kim, is striking because in that sense, the President of the United States missed a chance to come out as forcefully. And I say that because there's a sense in the reelection calculation in the White House and their campaign that he has to try to please the Arab Americans in Dearborn, try to please the activist young people who are for some reason beguiled into thinking that Hamas is a representative of democracy against an apartheid state in Israel. And he just doesn't come out and say that forcefully. And I think it would really, really help him politically, because I think voters who are on the fence about Biden or Trump want to see strong leadership. And that was an opportunity for him to take it. Despite the good statement today, it's still not where I think he should be. I think he needs to take a risk and appeal to the middle of the country and the people who are concerned about disorder.
To round back to where we started, that was kind of what I was trying to say about how I felt his comments today lacking. Because it's one thing to address the violence directly and talk about the acts themselves. But as you noted, Paul, why are people out on campuses? What's driving this? It's a reaction to his policy. And what's his policy? His policy has been, at least on paper, and at least in the beginning, quite forcefully, that we were going to back the democratic state of Israel that had been viciously attacked by a terrorist group, and that people understand that Israel is now engaged in an effort to remove those terrorists so that the Palestinian people will also be free of Hamas, but that they can neutralize what has been a long-going terror threat to their own people. Joe Biden initially said that. But as the criticism of him has ramped up, the moral part of that argument he has left aside. And so, yeah, his statement today was addressing campus protests, but he was not talking about the bigger issue and offering any leadership. And it really is causing him problems. I would just note, his party is now split on this issue. Republicans are forcing them to take votes. The headlines are about the 70 Democrats who yesterday could not bring themselves to vote for a bill defining anti-Semitism. And you are also setting up the stage for these protests to grow, continue, and to carry into the Democratic National Convention this summer. And if you want to know where all that leads, I would point you to the year 1968 and Nixon's victory.
Well, that is very much on the mind of the White House as we go ahead here. They do not want to be caught in the middle, alienating their base, at the same time not appealing to the middle. And yet I think some of their policies so far and actions have suggested that's where they could get caught up. Mary, I just want to take up one other point. The House of Representatives has passed the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act this week, which is it's not very far-reaching. It would just mandate that when the Department of Education enforces the federal anti-discrimination laws on campuses that receive federal funds, that the DOE must use the definition of anti-Semitism put forward by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. It's hardly a radical thought. But in it passed 320 to 91, but 70 Democrats voted against it and 21 Republicans. And the critics on the Republican side said, well, it just went too far to punish speech.
I mean, I think the spirit of it is what matters. And I do think that we need leadership in Washington that speaks more directly to this problem of anti-Semitism. What's going on in Gaza right now, there's an effort to come up with a peace agreement that would free the hostages and reduce the violence and get food into Gaza and so forth. Hamas is not interested in that because their whole agenda is we must destroy the Jews. And in this country, that strategy, that what has to be done in Gaza is basically let Hamas win, reeks of anti-Semitism. If our leadership in Washington doesn't start to speak out about this, I'm worried that things could get worse before they get better.
All right. I do think that this is not going to die, and we're going to see more of this before it all dies down, if it indeed does, as long as this war in Gaza continues.